All right, today we're doing a deep dive. We're digging into the historical soil from which Christianity actually grew. I mean, where did this world-changing faith really come from? We're going to peel back the layers of a story you think you know and see what our source material has to say. So let's get right into it. You know this story, right? It's the one we're all familiar with. It's often presented as this incredible miracle, and it's perfectly captured by this analogy of the mustard seed. The idea is that this tiny, divinely planted seed, against all odds, just exploded into this massive world-spanning tree. And this is the central question we're tackling today. Was the incredible growth of Christianity really a sudden supernatural event? Or, as our source material suggests, was the Roman Empire kind of the perfect fertile ground, just waiting for a seed exactly like this to be planted? Okay, so here's our roadmap for this investigation. We're going to start with that traditional mustard seed story. Then we'll dive into the world it was born into, an empire that was, well, in a state of crisis. We'll look at the existing blueprints for belief, the widespread expectation for a savior, and then finally, we'll piece it all together to see what our source calls Christianity's winning formula. So first up, let's look at that familiar story, the traditional account, which is largely shaped by the Acts of the Apostles. This version of events has pretty much defined how we've understood Christian origins for centuries. So the story goes something like this. A small, pure community starts in Jerusalem, led by Peter and John. This little group becomes the model for every other community that follows. Then you've got the Apostle Paul, who takes this message out to the non-Jewish world, the Gentiles. And in just about 20 years, this tiny seed just explodes into a universal church. That's the story. But it's really just the beginning of our investigation. All right, now let's zoom out. Let's look at the bigger picture here. What was the Roman Empire really like in the first century? Was it the stable, glorious golden age? Or was there something else kind of bubbling just under the surface? Well, for the elite, it was an empire of just staggering wealth, but also profound emptiness. Our source draws on writers like Seneca to paint this picture of these decadent aristocrats whose lives were just a frantic, endless search for new pleasures, all to distract from this deep underlying despair. In this quote from Seneca, wow, it just cuts right to the heart of the crisis. See, underneath all that glitz and glam, there was this constant, gnawing fear. The ruling class knew, they absolutely knew, that their entire world was built on the backs of a huge, oppressed population, and they lived in constant terror of the fury that was just simmering below. And wow, this just lays it all out, doesn't it? The sheer chasm between these two worlds is just stunning. On one side, you've got the senator, defined by his immense wealth, his political power, his fancy purple striped toga, and on the other, the slave, legally considered property, Mancipia, living under the constant threat of torture and filled with what the source calls a boundless hatred for their masters. This kind of extreme social tension created a desperate spiritual vacuum. Okay, so if the social soil was ready, where did this new religion get its structure, its core ideas? Well, it turns out it didn't have to invent them from scratch. The blueprints were kind of already there. Get this, long before Christian communities ever existed, the Greek world was filled with these brotherhoods called theosoi. These were basically unions of merchants, sailors, artists, people who pulled away from the stresses of public life. They focused on helping each other out, sharing meals, making sure everyone got a proper burial, and they practiced these secret initiation rites they called mysteries. I mean, that sounds remarkably like a template for a church, doesn't it? And the connection gets even clearer when you look at the concept of koinonia. This was that comradely, collective principle that early Christians praised, where property was shared and there was no mine and thine. This wasn't some brand new idea. It directly echoed that mutual aid focus of those pre-existing Greek brotherhoods. Okay, but what's really fascinating is that it wasn't just the community structure. Even the central symbols of Christianity had these incredible parallels in the popular mystery cults of the day. The idea of a god who suffers, dies, and then is resurrected, that's the story of Dionysus. A heroic figure who conquers death and descends to the underworld, that's Orpheus. And you really can't get much more direct than this. The popular image of the god Hermes, the guardian of the flock, carrying a lost lamb on his shoulders, well, that became the direct prototype for one of the most powerful and enduring images of Christ, the Good Shepherd. It was an existing pagan image, adopted and repurposed for a new faith. And philosophy played a huge role too. Stoicism was incredibly popular among educated Romans at the time. And just look at the ideas it was putting out there. Belief in a single, universal God, the body is just a temporary prison for an immortal soul, death is a form of liberation, and this really radical notion that all people are fundamentally equal. These concepts would become absolute cornerstones of Christian theology. So now let's turn to the central figure of the faith. Was the idea of a single messianic savior, a Christ figure, something that came completely out of the blue? Was it totally unique? Now, just to be clear, we're not talking theology here. We're looking at this as historians. And what our source suggests is that both the name Jesus and the whole archetype of a savior were already circulating widely in the culture at the time. I mean, check this out. The famous first-century historian Josephus Flavius mentions several popular leaders and prophets who were named Jesus. There was a Jesus, son of Cepheus, who led a rebellion of the poor. There was a Jesus, son of Ananias, a peasant prophet who foretold the destruction of Jerusalem. The name itself was common, and it was often attached to these figures who spoke for the oppressed. So here's the bottom line. Within the Jewish world, which was being crushed under Roman rule, there was this intense, burning expectation for a savior. Prophecies were buzzing about a deliverer who would overthrow the satanic state of Rome. The hope for Messiah wasn't just some vague idea, it was this powerful political and spiritual yearning, just waiting for a figure to step in and fulfill it. So, how did all these different streams, the social crisis, the Greek organizations, the popular myths, Stoic philosophy, and this intense Jewish messianic hope, how did they all converge into one world-altering religion? Let's put the pieces together and look at the powerful synthesis that happened. Think of it like a recipe for a world religion. Step 1, you start with the widespread despair in the Roman Empire. Step 2, you add the ready-made community structure from the Greek thiosoi. Step 3, you infuse it with compelling philosophical ideas from the Stoics and these powerful dramatic stories from the mystery cults. And step 4, you combine all of that with the fiery Jewish expectation for a savior. And the result? A potent new faith with a universal message that spoke directly to the suffering of the masses. And this, right here, was the absolute masterstroke. It took the powerful idea of being a chosen people, which had once been exclusive to Judaism, and it extended it to everyone. Suddenly, anyone, slave or senator, Greek or Gaul, could join this new chosen family. This was the genius innovation that allowed Christianity to break out of its origins and just sweep across the entire empire. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This historical lens shows that what often looks like a sudden revolution is actually the result of long, slow preparation under the surface. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What powerful ideas in our world today, things we think of as brand new, are actually the culmination of historical currents that have been flowing unseen for generations.